So long as the problem exists and so long as a solution apparently exists, then it is incumbent upon us to demand that the problem be solved in the schools. Okay, let's do a little of these.
As long as I'm around, this is still the best game in town, even though it's very punishing. But it's worth it, and I still think I can win. I forgot to tell you, I hate to lose. I was working as a marketing director for a medium-sized advertising agency, and they wanted to know how many repetitions it took for kids to learn something. And the president of this company that they were setting up a marketing plan for, it was in Centralia, Illinois, and of course the name was Hollywood Candy Company. I mean, what the heck? He asked the question, like, how many exposures does it take for a kid to learn something from TV? I don't want to spend this money unless I'm pretty sure that I'm going to get my money's worth. How much are we talking about? How much exposure? So I had the job of looking up in the research libraries information about how much repetition it took. I couldn't find anything, not a word. And so what we decided to do was get a little group of kids together and run some slogans and things by them in the context of daily living and see how much they learned. And the thing very quickly evolved into a school. So I ended up with a little tiny preschool there, about 4 or 5 kids who came and went, as it were. And then I ended up doing stuff with my own kids, my oldest kid, Eric, and then my twin boys, Owen and Kurt, who are fraternal and don't look much like each other. and it was great. I mean, I learned a ton. And what I learned most was if they made a mistake, it was probably my fault, that I either assumed something I shouldn't have assumed, because you know what that does to both of us if we assume. and from there, it was just a question of I had to get into education. I didn't want to be in advertising. That didn't seem to be my shining star in any way.
So these initial explorations with your own children and the preschool children went from there to an actual preschool. Could you tell us how that unfolded with the initial preschool at Illinois?
Yeah. I decided that I couldn't work in advertising anymore. I quit my job, so I had no work. My wife was going to law school, and she wasn't earning a living, and we still had some royalty income from oil wells when I was in the oil business, which is a totally another story. And so we were running out of money, and I had to find a job. So I made up a list of, I don't remember, 20 names of institutions that I thought would be interested in the information I had and the knowledge that I had gained in designing instructional programs. So I went to all of those, and I was rejected by all of them. One of them was SRA. And when it was all over, I showed that film of Owen and Kurt sitting at this window. I did the camera's looking at it from this angle, and I'm writing on it here. They're sitting next to me, but you can see through it because it's a window, so all the writing is backwards. But you can figure out what it is. And so I showed them the film at SRA, and they looked at it, and this one guy said, "That's amazing." He said, "How'd you do that?" And I said, you know, what? He says, "What were you writing with there?" And no kidding. And I said, it's a felt pen. And he says, "And how'd you erase it?" And I, I said, really? And I said, with a naphtha rag. Oh, I know, people now don't even know what naphtha is. It's a highly flammable substance that's outlawed. But you can get high on it, you know. Hey, boys, let's get ready to rumble.
So,
But wait a minute. Wait a minute. So the last place on the list was the place that seemed the most unlikely to me. It was the Institute for Research on Exceptional Children at the University of Illinois, which was renowned and which was in the news a lot. There were a lot of articles on particularly James Gallagher and Carl Bereiter. And so I figured, well, I may as well run the course and do the last one. So I called the university and set up a meeting with Gallagher and Bereiter. And they sat and they watched the tape and asked me some questions. And they were clearly interested in it, totally unlike the responses of any of the other people I'd talked to. And then when it was over, James Gallagher said, "Can you do that again? You know, stuff you've done on tape there." And I said, or film. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, let's see. We'll hire you." And they hired me as a research associate. And yes! No, I was really happy. I mean, that was a real high point. And those guys were wonderful. They really were good to work with. But that's how I got the first position. I was a research associate, and we had a half-day kindergarten. We had 4 subjects. We had the best subject was music. We had the best music periods in the world. They were really good. But then we had arithmetic, reading, and language. It was awesome. I mean, it was great. It was a wonderful experience.
could you describe what the prevailing way kids were taught to learn at that stage and what you kind of discovered?
Well, there was this field, and there still is, called early childhood education. And they tend to have norms about what kids typically do at different ages, but precious little about what you do if you want to induce particular learning. But we were interested in a different question. What does it take to teach them? Not what do they learn in some undisclosed environment. What do they learn in a very carefully controlled environment in which all the information comes from you? And it's really great with preschool kids because anything that they learn will come from you. They probably, the stuff that we ended up teaching, they would not learn in an ordinary environment. Like we ended up teaching the kids simple algebra and math way beyond what a 4-year-old would do. And they could learn it. They could learn it if you could sequence it properly and present it properly.
Could you give an example of something that you taught either Owen and Kurt or at the preschool that separates your approach from what Piaget and developmentalists were looking at?
Okay, that's easy. Anything. No, Piaget looked at things from a totally different perspective. I'll use the initials, BS. Because 1, the schemes didn't work, and 2, it had no implications for instruction. So what do you do if a kid is developmentally behind? Let me guess. Hold your breath and hang on. I mean, and what kind of an instructional system is that? That's backwards, that's stupid, and that's not instruction. So what you want to do is set it up so that you don't have to wait on development unrealistically. You certainly have to wait on development to the extent that if you present them with something and they can't do it, you can't say, hey, you're age 13, you should be able to do this. You're entering the stage of formal operation. No, you'd have to say, well, let's see what you don't know. We'll teach it to you, see how fast you can learn it, and move on from there.
So you mentioned working with Owen and Kurt when they were little guys. You've obviously fed them well. Yes. And then that enabled you to produce a book with Therese on Give Your Child a Superior Mind.
Right.
Could you just tell us what prompted that and what real message you're trying to pull out from that book?
Aside from make a buck?
Oh,
No, well, we thought we had a message to say, which was that like academic learning is not everything. Kids have to learn from their environment. They have to learn from their experience, and they have to learn how to learn some things on their own, including how to deal with problems. But in terms of the realm of academic learning, you can do it. You can give them a head start. You can teach them stuff at an early age that they will tend to retain and that will tend to accelerate their performance. So it was a very popular book.
could you just describe a little bit in those very early days of what the schedule looked like?
The schedule was that we would teach, and then after every day, we would sit down for about half an hour and figure out what we did that was wrong and what was sloppy and what we had to change and what we were going to do tomorrow. And then I'd typically go in and write some stuff up, and it kept going on like that. And we got kind of more and more on target.
So initially there's a focus on what to teach the kids and a big focus on watching the children, how they're responding. What did you run into with the teachers trying to deliver the curriculum that you were generating as well as following what you wanted them to do?
The big problem came when we tried to train somebody new. Is anybody new, it was like a foreign situation. And so we'd give them a list of instances, we'd let them sit with us, we'd demonstrate things, and then have them do it, right with the kids there. Have a group of 3 or 5 kids and just go through it. And we did that for a while, and with a couple of the people, it tended to work sort of modestly okay, but they couldn't get it. And they just weren't getting it. What we ended up doing was scripting the presentation. And then, ta-da, we could train new people and went on from there.
So the scripting has, it's part and parcel of DI, and over the years it's often been a source of contention, especially people starting out. Once they start doing it and seeing kids learn, that's a different factor. But
Right.
getting over the hump, how have you dealt with that over the years of trying to get the sell on using scripts? Because I know teachers resisted by and large initially.
Well, the way we've dealt with it primarily is with great effort. And the only thing that saves it is for them to see, oh my gracious, that's the way they talk. It works. No, if it doesn't work, it's no good. But they discover that it does work. And then you see them turn around. And that's hard for them to get. They don't realize how much they overtalk, how much their instructions are unclear, and how impatient they get with the kids when they're unable to say it exactly the way they want to say it. But consistency in wording is, necessary. You can't go very far without it. And you couldn't get consistency in wording unless you scripted the presentation. It was just impossible.
So if you had to do things over, you'd stay with the scripting as is pretty well? Would you do anything different?
No.
Yeah.
No, there's nothing you could do different. And anyone who went at it seriously and recognized how important the exact wording that the teacher uses with low performance would come to exactly the same conclusion. Because once we did that, we could train new people.
So the preschool is established, you got your teacher training, you got the curriculum underway, so made some real good gains. Now we have follow-through. Could you just share with us how follow-through involved you or got started, put it that way, or your involvement with follow-through initially?
I was in New York and I gave a talk, and after the talk, I reported on the data in the preschool, and after the talk, this guy comes up and introduces himself as Dick Schneider, and started talking about follow-through and that they were planning a follow-through program. And I confessed to him that I'd never heard of follow-through, and he confessed to me that he never heard of direct instruction or Bereiter and me or Becker and me, because Becker was now in charge. Bereiter had gone to Canada, and it was Wesley Becker who took his place and saved the project by being the head of it. I could not be head of the project or director because I had no degrees. I had a BA in philosophy, and that was it. So Becker moved in and took over the project, and it was a very noble thing he did, to leave the ivory tower and have all these accolades and graduate students doing things and doing research on your own, and then to get down to the gritty of working with preschool kids and later with follow-through. That was a heck of a commitment.
So,
anyhow,
go ahead.
So I was in New York. This is a short answer,
Okay.
trust me.
That's my job.
So, and I gave this talk, and so Schneider said that they were meeting, all the follow-through sponsors were meeting the next week in Washington. And could I be there, and were we interested in becoming a follow-through sponsor? So I hot-footed it to the phone and called Wes and told him the situation, and I said, should we do it? And he says, yeah, let's do it. And yes! So I gave Schneider a heads up, and we were then on the docket to be a follow-through sponsor. But we were not originally slated. If Schneider hadn't gone to that talk, and if I hadn't given enough evidence that we had a model, who knows?
Briefly summarize who was involved and then the major results.
There were 22 sponsors, 198 communities. Over the years, there was well over 100,000 students. In fact, while it was going on, there were darn near that many per year. And it lasted from 1968 to 1977 when it was evaluated. We had the full range, like we had several Native American sites in South Dakota. We had a lot of black sites. We had a couple of non-English, Spanish-speaking sites. And, well, we also had Cherokee, North Carolina, which was Indian. So we had a really big sample. And we had probably a total of over 40 schools. If we were a district, we would have been a pretty large district. And Wes managed the data side of it and the administrative side. And I managed the training of trainers and the instructional side. And we spent a lot of time on the road, a lot of time on the road. Way, way more time on the road when one should have been home with one's family, raising one's kids. But anyhow, it was very busy time, and the data was that we beat everybody in everything. We beat them in the affective, we beat them in the cognitive, we beat them in the basic, and there was no comparison. We were off the wall, the only one that was superior in all categories, everything measured. Like they had one scale of responsibility, self-responsibility, how responsible students feel for their education or their lot in life, as it were. And we had the highest scores, that our kids were very realistic and very confident about what they could do, but very realistic about where they were.
And what outcomes from these results would you say?
Probably I could use a bunch of four-letter words, but probably the most accurate would be PAIN. That it was devastating, because they had said all along, the follow-through was a horse race to compare these models, to see what works. And they had their own visions of how it would work, that they had Stallings doing studies and other people, and their prejudice was that one group, the group that they listed as cognitive, would have superior scores in cognitive measures. And the basic guys, whoa, yeah, we'd beat them in math facts. And then those effective ones, the ones that are concerned with development and all, why they would have more effective outcomes and more sensitive students, or whatever their perverted definitions were. But that's what they proved to be, total perversions. We made a mockery out of everything. And in the apt report, which summarized the results of follow-through, they made several comments in which they said, like that the DI model never professed to be concerned with self-image, and yet our kids had the best self-image. Well, guess why? They had the most realistic data about their success, and they knew damn well they were smart. But it was totally devastating, because then they said that they weren't even going to disseminate true data on follow-through. And like Wes communicated with senators and tried to do the political thing. And in that, the book that I wrote last, the PAIN book, Teaching Needy Kids in Our Backward System, I have some letters there from, like one from the Commissioner of Education that mentions in several places. Only one model was successful with all kids. Therefore, we cannot disseminate information on follow-through models. Why? Because it didn't meet their standard that there would be all these different combinations that they could futz over, that there was only one winner. But he said in a couple of places there was only one winner, and that was the Becker-Engelmann model.
Let's look at another spin now that just really validates DI, and that's an incredible range of application. It's not just teaching little kids reading, writing, math, and spelling. You just tell us a little bit the other groups, the deaf, the brain injured, just summarize that a bit for us, just to give us a feel of, as I said, its range of application and success there.
Well, I think that one of the reasons we got involved in these fields is because Wes and I were the same. We were different in a lot of ways, but we were the same in one way, and that is the use of data. And like I said, from the first applications, we were interested in how many trials it took to teach things. And I was always fascinated with that. And so with the deaf kids, can they learn to speak? What does it take to teach them to speak properly? Because true, profound deaf kids don't learn to speak. Period. And if they can't speak, I can tell you how much hearing they have just by listening to them talk. If their voice goes up and down the way yours does, then they can hear some. If it's total cacophony, like, then they're deaf. They're profoundly deaf. Because they can't hear, they can't modulate. And so we got very interested in what kind of device we could construct to teach them. And then it turned out how many trials, not could they learn this stuff, but what was the pattern of their learning? How many trials did it take? And how did that curve improve as they learned more and more? And the curve was spectacular. Like the initial stuff, like about 1,600 trials to learn simple discriminations at the beginning, and then down at the end, they could learn it in a single trial 9 months later.
In a word, tell us why you came here and what were your goals here.
Why we came here? Consensus. I voted not to go here. No, we had the project decided that we couldn't stay at the University of Illinois for two reasons. I had created problems with the purchasing department, by telling a guy that his procedures were bullshit. And then in addition to that, we were not able to train teachers. This was probably more important even. And so we were looking for a place where we could have teacher training with undergraduates and regular teacher training, and have a section. We didn't ask for all the teacher training, just a section, and in which we would have a certain amount of autonomy in terms of the project. And there were only 2 places that were interested, although we advertised to every place that said that they were interested in serving disadvantaged kids. And there were only 2 that came out positive. One was Temple University, and the other was University of Illinois. And so, Oregon, we were at Illinois, that's right. And so I voted for Temple because Oregon was remote with respect to our sites, and it was the end of the world. Travel out of here is insane. Whereas if we were in Temple, we'd be within spitting distance of 10 of our sites. So that was great. And the negotiations were going great with Temple, and then we got a letter from this university level dean that we were negotiating with, and we hadn't heard from him for a while, and then here comes this letter. So I'm sorry to announce that I can't invite you to come to Temple University because the staff and faculty in 2 departments voted unanimously not to have you come here. Unanimously. I could see a plurality or a majority, but unanimously. That'll stick in a guy's craw right now. So I guess the answer is default.
So what were your goals when you came to Oregon?
To have a good teacher training program and to, continue to work with our sites. And the operation that we had with our sites was we wanted to keep on top of it enough that we knew what was happening and that we were training the people in what they were having trouble doing. And so it was more a troubleshooting model. And we tried doing different things. Some of them worked, some of them didn't.
What's it take to get a program implemented school-wide? Could you lay that out? What you really need to do for successful implementation, what you've learned there?
The number one, the keystone is, if you have the principal, no matter how bad the teaching is in the school, and if that principal has a strong will and is determined to turn that school around so that the kids really learn something, it will happen. And it will happen. But without that, it won't happen. You need an administrator. And often you need some hometown call in the central administration, or they're going to shoot you down somewhere along the line, even if you have a good principal. But if you don't have a good principal, pack it up, move on. It ain't going to happen. Because they'll always get bullied by the 3rd grade teacher who is, like the prima donna of the school and the best teacher, and really has people listening to her in the teacher's lounge. She'll just raise hell. But if she knows and the others know, I'm sorry, it's not negotiable for the simple reason we have to be coordinated. Everybody has to teach the same way, in the same style, the same stuff, so that 4th grade teachers know who they're getting, and everybody's prepared. So on day 1 of the next semester, next term, we can start.
One of your major accomplishments is that theory of instruction book. And I was just wondering if you could take a couple of minutes to say, here are the basic tenets of DI that sort of emerge from that.
Are we timing this with an hourglass or an ordinary clock?
Just a few.
Well, I mean, the basic rules are that the organism is perfectly lawful, and that what humans learn is perfectly consistent with the input that they receive. And that doesn't mean they're all going to learn the same thing from the same input, because of the simple fact that if you take the simplest object you can find, like this piece of paper, that it is an example of an indefinitely large number of concepts, like not 10, not 20, not 500,000, but many. And so you have to, really, is this an example of east of the Mississippi? No. Is this an example of west of the Mississippi? Is this something held in the hand? Is this something that's moving? Is this something that's rectangular? Is this something, whoops, that's on the floor? That's misguided? No, I mean, logically and indefinitely large. But they don't want to look at it that way. But it follows from the fact that if it's indefinitely large and you wanted to teach one of the things for which it is an example, you have to order the presentation so you rule out all the other possibilities. That's all there is to it. That's the summary. And nothing more. Simple, done. But now let's apply it to something. No, that's where it becomes tricky. Did you need that page?
Not anymore. Zig, one of the things we all admire about you is not so much the genius in creating the programs, but just sustaining the efforts. I couldn't help thinking at your keynote yesterday. Here's a man in his 70s. With so much passion. You know, most people would burn out. Most people would give up. They would, and yet Zig keeps going. What keeps you going?
I honestly don't know. That I think it was something that got wired into me like years ago when I decided that I would, quote, do what's right. But those things that I dedicate myself to do, I'm going to do. And I sort of feel that as long as I'm around, this is still the best game in town, even though it's very punishing. I mean, it really is. But it's worth it, and I still think I can win. I forgot to tell you, I hate to lose.
I hadn't noticed that. I wrote that. If we look into the future, could I ask you, what kind of hopes or aspirations do you have, outside of yourself for direct instruction?
I have to satisfy myself with what we can do now. If I look beyond that, there are too many times where I've just been blistered. I'm interested in, we're working on a good project today, and we're setting it up so we'll work on a good project tomorrow, and that's the way we're going to do it, and we're going to do a good job, and here we go. Today's today, and let's get dressed in our standard uniform. And
I guess it's a similar question, but what do you say to your colleagues and protégés and upcoming stars?
I tell them that they'll never be recognized for what they do, and they will be able to do a lot for kids. And if that's not enough satisfaction, then, don't do it, because you can get more fame and glory and money and whatever doing other things.
To me, it really is a moral issue.
Yeah, it is. It's framed as a moral issue, but it's a masquerade. The moral issue that they advertise is like, oh, we care about kids. We're interested in their development. We're doing what's best for them. We're working with the community. We're doing all this peripheral stuff, and they're not doing anything that is functionally worth a damn. And, they just have to be called on that. And at some point, some segment of the whole educational establishment, from measurement on down, to training teachers has to recognize that it's a sham and that it needs to be overhauled and centered around what it's supposed to be about. Not about how kids learn, but about how we teach them and how we teach them most effectively and how we attend to their needs. And so it just has to be called what it is, a sham. And once that would be the first step, and then after that, then it could be productive. Then school districts could have their Department of Education or their Department of Research really be a Department of Research, where they're collecting data, they're looking at outcomes, they are responding in a timely way to what's going on in different schools, they're testing out programs before adopting them, they're looking at how kids learn this stuff, and they're doing all the stuff that you would do in a business.
Well, I'm going to close with these remarks, Zig, that it's just words, but I want to offer you a big thank you on behalf of everyone here, all the kids you've taught, all the teachers you've given hope to, and particularly your undying passion, keeping at it, having a focus, putting up with the downs and so on. It's not only your genius, but it's also your courage. And they're different, and it's extraordinary that we got both of those in the one package in you. And I need to go to Abigail Adams to say what I want to say. And she said, I'll have to read it because it's a quote, great necessities call forth great leaders. And we surely have a great necessity in education today, as you've so clearly indicated, and what it's going to take to change that, which will be a long haul. So we have the great necessity and call forth great leaders. We got a wonderful leader in you, and I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you.
Oh, there was one more question. It says here, say what you really think.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.